Yeah, the thing that's really stood out and amazed me is just the closeness of Formula One. It's become like a one-week formula. I've got about 4 stories on the tip of my tongue which are going to stay there because, like good teammates, you never ever tell. I don't think any of us would disagree that Senna would be considered one of the drivers of the history of the sport. So he was able to exploit the performance of his car without having all the buttons, and the current drivers are able to exploit the performance of their car with all the buttons. I don't think the buttons matter. I think the brightest drivers are the brightest drivers. That's where the super drivers, the exceptionals, the guys that go on to win world championships, they have raw speed and they have all of the other skills that are involved in racing.
Well, it is the Pit Talk podcast powered by Thara. It is Robert Doornbos. It is myself, Chris McHardy. And I tell you what, Robert, you've been promising us a big name all season. You've finally reeled in a big fish.
Yes, my former teammate, also Scottish.
Also Scottish.
Also Scottish.
We're going to need subtitles for you.
Probably. So I get you guys going, but take it easy.
Let's get into this man. What a legend he is. You know him very well. Former teammate of yours. I caught up with him in Abu Dhabi last year. 62 podiums, 246 starts in Formula One. Runner-up in 2001 in the World Championship. He had 13 race wins as well. He flies the Scottish flag. It's the one and only David Coulthard. David, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on, I guess, our time zones. But yeah, you say I fly the Scottish flag. You know the Scottish flag isn't recognised by the FIA. So Frank Williams, very kindly, when I joined Williams, allowed me to put the Scottish flag on my suit. No, I'm British, so I'm nothing against the Union Jack. But as you will know, I'm the Scottish division of the British, the United Kingdom. So to get the Scottish flag on the suit and on the side of the car took special dispensation from FIA and from the Williams Formula One team. So anyway, that's a wee history on our small nation needs to be recognised.
Yeah, but don't forget about your helmet. The helmet design is fairly Scottish as well.
Yeah, my first ever race I did was just with a white helmet because, back in those days, there wasn't really helmet jobs as such. There was other jobs, but no helmet jobs. And the second race I turned up and a guy called Brian Smith had painted the Scottish flag. He'd put Budgie on the front, which was my nickname. And there was a small bicycle by a company called Raleigh that was called the Budgie bike. And I was apparently always on this bike. So he did that. And on the back, he put DC, which obviously a lot of people call me DC. I dropped the budgie off the front when I got into cars.
Chose the right one. Yeah.
But the helmet design has remained the same.
Listen, it's great to have you on the podcast, David. And I'm going to embarrass Robert straight off the bat. You guys are former teammates. So bearing in mind, this is a family-friendly podcast. But, David, you must have a story. Because Robert says that he was whiter than white when it comes to his F1 career. You probably got a story that says otherwise.
Well, 100%. I've got about 4 stories on the tip of my tongue, which are going to stay there because, like good teammates, you never, ever tell.
Never tell.
And no, look, we were in the building years of Red Bull, of course. The foundations that Robert laid allowed Vettel and Max to go on and win world championships in the future. But of course, on track, it was all very serious. Off track, we had an appreciation. It's like the beginning of a joke, isn't it? A Dutchman and a Scotsman walk into a bar. You can fill in the rest.
Car. Yeah, great memories.
And what about you of DC, Robert?
Well, the first thing one of the first moments I met DC was, I think in '98. I didn't meet you, but I did see you in Spa, Belgium, going into turn 1. And then after this huge pileup of all these cars that crashed, that was my first experience in Formula One. And then a few years later, I made my debut at Minardi, and I was fortunate enough to move up to Red Bull when David was there already. And I remember one of the ladies that organized our trips at the team. She said, "Robert, you have to go to Jerez for the first test. This is the flight option, or you can go with DC." I was like, I go with DC. And I jumped on this plane, and luckily it all went well. But then I sort of thought, okay, I made it. I was sitting there And DC was so comfortable in the plane. His girlfriend showed up, and I was like, okay, I'm this rookie guy sitting here on the back seat, trying to catch a lift to Jerez. So yeah, then I thought I made it.
And it's great memories. I always love listening to you guys, the guys that have been there, seen it, done it. It's a question you probably get a lot, DC, but, you know, do you miss it? Do you miss life as a Formula One driver?
Well, I guess I'm lucky enough to be able to say no, because I had a 15-year stint as a driver. I did a few years before that as a test driver when you actually did tests. You know, I was out somewhere on track each week. So I had my fill really of driving Formula One cars. It's fantastic. Of course it is. You've got one of the fastest cars in the world. You're part of the development program. You're pushing the boundaries week in, week out. But I guess a bit like anything that you do a lot, the novelty wears off after a period of time. And then having had that full opportunity, Williams, McLaren and Red Bull, I'd achieved everything that I could with my talent, or the limitations of my talent. So that allowed me to be able to go, yeah, look, I've tried, I've done my best. That's what's possible for me. I suppose for someone like Robert, who, you know, never really got a chance in a top car, therefore never got the opportunity to compete wheel to wheel for podiums and victories, along with the long line of drivers that have never had that opportunity, there must be an element of frustration. So kind of the answer, a short answer, which I started to give a long answer, is I don't miss it. But I guess the question to Robert, I suppose maybe you do miss it because you never got a fair crack of the whip.
Yeah, true. No, I listened from the fast lane. I think if you can make from your hobby a profession, you're a lucky guy. So Formula One was a dream I realized it came true. And I think you have to have sort of boundaries or targets that you have to achieve. The first target I had was to drive a Formula One car, to experience it. And I remember asking Eddie Jordan this on the grid in Spa, Belgium in 2004. I was racing in Formula 3000 back then. I was on pole position. And you remember those days that all these team bosses walked by back and forth on the grid. And I just bumped into Eddie Jordan, the big Eddie Jordan. And I said, Mr. Jordan, it's my dream to become a Formula One driver. I'm on pole position, by the way. And he said, good for you. And he kept on walking. And I was like, okay, in my mind, that went better. So I asked him again. I said, no, Mr. Jordan, you don't understand. I just want to drive a Formula One car one day. Can you help me out? He said, you know what? If you win this race with a 30-second lead, I might give you a chance. Because there was a Spanish guy who did this a few years ago, and his name is Alonso. And I was like, yeah, but it's impossible to win it with a 30-second lead. And the weirdest thing happened. It started to rain, and I had the best setup. I remember Liucci, he was my teammate back at Arden. He had the dry setup, I had the wet setup. So I won the race with 30-second advantage, 32 to be precise. And instead of walking to the team, I walked over to Eddie. And then Eddie said, okay, I'm going to give you a chance in F1. It will cost you, I think, 150,000 pounds, but you can fly out to China. So this is the first dream that came true. And the second one, obviously, to be your teammate, David. And that was also another tick the box moment. But yeah, long answer to a question. I do not miss it because I made from my hobby my profession again. I'm still involved with F1 like you do with media. I get to go on the track once in a while with my Porsche clients, and so it's been a great chapter, yeah. But it's still nice to fulfill this dream.
And it's interesting there, DC. Robert mentions your great friend, the late great Eddie Jordan, gone but never forgotten Eddie for his huge influence on the paddock and on the sport of Formula One. Do you miss him every day, DC?
Yeah, there's not a day goes by that I don't think of EJ. And he was a larger-than-life character. He was, I think, probably the last of a generation of entrepreneurial motor racing team owners. And the sport has evolved now that I think it'd be very difficult for anyone to come in off their own back, off their own, you know, leveraging all of the finances that is required. You know, the Formula One teams now are so big and there's so much technology. Yeah, Eddie, it all passed very quickly in the end, and he was, up until the last couple of weeks when I last spoke with him, you know, we recorded a final podcast, and he was still in fighting spirit. And he's a great reminder, not only for everyone to get themselves checked, you know, for the various cancers that can affect us, but men particularly, of course. You know, he was very vocal on the fact that if he'd been tested sooner, it may have been a different outcome. So to that very end, I'm just in the throes of making sure that my checkup, which I'll be doing when I come to Dubai, actually, is all ahead of Abu Dhabi, is all in hand, because I just want to make sure that whatever fate lines up for me, I give myself the best chance of catching it and recovering from it. But yeah, Eddie, another reminder actually, and Robert, you may be able to relate to this, having faced the dangers of racing, is that we live our lives thinking, especially when you're younger, thinking that it's an infinite thing. And as you get older, you become more aware, and once you have kids and things like that, you become more aware of your own mortality. And in a blink of an eye, you're at the other end of your life. I'm 54, definitely closer to the end than the beginning. Not that I relish that thought, but it's just the journey of life of which we can't control. So it's a big reminder to live your life full, which EJ did. He was, he was borderline crazy, wasn't he? Anywhere he went, he sort of took over, whether it was a restaurant or a bar or a serious event. But he's left his mark.
And the way he did business as well, I think that, like you said, one of the last iconic team bosses that really built up a Formula One team from scratch and made it the team it was. It's still the backbone of the Aston Martin team nowadays, So I remember a few years back, I met him in Monaco, just walking the street there, and then he's like, "Hey bro, how's life?" Yeah, all good. I said, "How's your life?" I said, "Great. You see that apartment over there?" He said, "Your sponsors are still paying for it." So, I mean, the way he said it with a smile is like you accept it, right? If otherwise, you would say, "Oh." So I think that everybody misses him in the paddock for sure. I mean,
yes.
And I tell you, he would have been loving DC, what has transpired this season, because we are into the throes now. We're into the home straight, pardon the pun, for a championship that is really ignited. Listen, Formula One didn't need to be ignited. Drive to Survive's done that, and the way the sport has evolved in the last 10 years has done that. But it has captured the imagination of many non-F1 fans. What are you making of it? We'll get into the nitty-gritty in a moment, but over the piece this season, are you absolutely loving what you're seeing out there on the track?
Yeah, the thing that's really stood out and amazed me is just the closeness of Formula One. It's become like a one-make formula in terms of the difference in performance from each of the cars across the top 10, across the top 20. Incredibly close. And there was an example earlier this year when we were in Barcelona. I think in Q1, the top 20 were covered by just over a second. And when I look back to, I think it was 98, 99, Mika was on pole, 0.7 of a second quicker than I was in second. And then third on the grid was Schumacher, 0.7 of a second slower than me. So 1.4 seconds covered the top three, never mind the entire grid, which was almost 4 seconds. And that was considered normal back then. And it didn't mean that in the race, that was the gap, because qualifying was with qualifying engines, it was a particular discipline in its own respect. Qualifying now is a compromise of race setup, of course, because you have to consider you'll put on 100 kilograms of fuel, start the Grand Prix on the Sunday. So you can't optimize the car for qualifying in the same way. But I think it's still impressive how close Formula One racing is, and that you can have a team like Sauber or Haas, who must have a fraction of the budget of your Ferraris and your Red Bulls, and probably haven't had any developments since the middle of the year, and they're still there and they're still competitive.
And also something nobody. I mean, when you're you eat heavy right food, and we have a steering wheel in front of us here. If you have now 70 functions which you need to be able to use while doing 300 kph, and back in the days that was different, and it's only getting more and more now with electrification of these engines. And next year the DRS will be gone. There will be even more functions, when to load the battery. So don't you think it's becoming a little bit too complex sometimes for well, depending on the driver's IQ, but it's
well, what is a great reminder to me just about how things have evolved. I bought at a charity auction that McLaren did when Ron Dennis was still there. I bought Ayrton Senna's last winning steering wheel from Adelaide. It was a winning steering wheel for Fernando Alonso when he's at McLaren, and a winning steering wheel from Jenson Button. So I've got the 3 steering wheels mounted on a, beautifully mounted as McLaren would do. The Senna steering wheel had a radio switch and a drink button, And then, of course, the Alonso and the button steering wheels are very much like the one that you have in front of you. Although the McLaren ones at that time didn't have the dash mounted on the steering wheel. The dash was mounted on the chassis.
Yeah.
But I don't think any of us would disagree that Senna would be considered one of the drivers of the history of the sport. So he was able to exploit the performance of his car without having all the buttons, and the current drivers are able to exploit the performance of their car with all the buttons. I don't think the buttons matter. I think the brightest drivers are the brightest drivers. They'll exploit every element of the car, the team, the media, exploit their contract to make sure they don't have to do too many marketing events. They're just the best because of the best, and the best demands very high standards. So I look at it like this: impossible to prove, but if you put Fangio, Jackie Stewart, Senna, Schumacher, Hamilton, Verstappen, whoever your favorite drivers are, put them all at 30 years old, which can never happen, but with the modern human performance and all the rest of it, they would just drive as quickly as each other, because talent's talent. I don't think the tennis players of the 20s were less talented than the tennis players of today. They just had more technology, and they would just take their human performance to another level. So that's the sort of headspace I live in, which as I said, you can never disprove to be wrong.
No, I guess I learned from you.
I'm sorry.
Off track.
Yeah, sorry, Robert. I was just going to finish on that. Maybe a better way to back that up. A better way to back that up is, you look at composers. You look at some of the great symphonies that were composed in the 1700s or whatever. People today would acknowledge how beautiful and amazing they are. So that's a better way, I think, of showing that talent is talent, irrespective of generation.
You always told me as well that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of your days with McLaren, and one of the stories you told me once when well, let me ask you differently. Who was your fastest teammate ever in Formula One? Apart from the obvious, but
yeah, apart from the obvious. Well, look, again, that comes down to a sort of matter of, I guess, statistics rather than opinion. I was 7 years as a teammate with Mika, and he comprehensively would out-qualify me during those 7 years. I was only a couple of years with Kimi, and I guess the stats were still heavily in his favor. Qualifying was never a particular strength of my career, which is why I think that was the limitation that restricted Grand Prix victories, especially against your teammate. If you're second on the grid, you're second on the pit stop roster, and it just becomes more challenging. But that's where the super drivers, the exceptionals, the guys that go on to win world championships, they have raw speed, and they have all of the other skills that are involved in racing. And I think that's where, when you lose that raw speed, which arguably Lewis could be in that situation right now, where he hasn't really dominated a teammate for the last 2-3 years. They always, in the peak of these guys' performances, Michael, when he was at Mercedes at the end of his career, was still a brilliant race driver, but he wasn't as full a package as he was when he was at Ferrari, when he was dominating the teammates. And I know that upsets people when mediocre drivers like myself criticize or apparently criticize the grades, but it's not a criticism. It's using data. The data doesn't lie. You can have as many opinions as you like, but the wonderful thing about motor racing is it's 2 data points. It's the stopwatch and it's the checkered flag. Everything else.
Days where there was no data. I think in British Formula 3, my teammate told me that turn 1 in where was it? Snetterton was flat out. So I went flat out. I ended up in a cornfield. So now the data, it just shows what you can do. But were you frustrated when the guy, like, I know Kimi, when in 2005 was really mega still at McLaren, but he was your teammate as well the years before. Was he like that talented that you almost got a little bit jealous of it, that he didn't put in the work, or was he? How was it like to be his teammate?
Yeah, no, he was, in my opinion, one of the most naturally talented, fast race drivers that's been in the sport. But I think that he would even acknowledge with a smile that he did the minimum amount of work that was necessary. Now, that's either because he's clever and that's what gave him longevity, or that's the way he's wired. Not everyone's the same. But I think that Michael as far as I could tell from the outside, had the talent and the work ethic. I think that Mika had the talent and did what he needed to do in the car. And I think, as Kimi was probably a step down in terms of his overall work ethic. But listen, those guys won more championships. I didn't. So that talent was enough to take them to where they needed to be. But I think that if you look at, Michael, Lewis, Max, these guys have talent and they work, don't they? They put in the hours with the engineers and do everything. Max is an example of when he's not in a Grand Prix car, he's in a simulator or he's in a GT3. There's somebody who has passion and work ethic.
Yeah, I remember that time we were in Suzuka, that Kimi actually partied that night in Tokyo, as we all did after the race in the Suzuka. And then he flew out to Las Vegas, which is the other side of the world, with his ice hockey buddies. And he came back and ended up winning the Grand Prix the following weekend, So it's like, how do you do that? I was in the gym after, trying to get ready for the next race. This is a legendary driver we all miss, but Max has similarities to it. He puts in a lot of work ethic, but the driving, it almost looks sometimes when I speak to Max, and you speak to him as well, he talks about his GT program, he talks about the sim racing, and talks about fun stuff in life, about cars and his new toys, whatever, as we all do. But that is like, Formula One almost becomes like a hobby for him. Yeah. He's so naturally driving that car and operating in that team and the environment. What do you think of Max this year? Did he step up another level in his performance?
I think that Max is a phenomenon, and anyone who's had the opportunity to spend time with him will know how grounded he is. Yeah. Which, if you've not had that chance and you only observe him online or at the Grand Prix, and if you are more of a Lewis fan or a Ferrari fan, then you're always going to be a little bit, it's going to be difficult for you to truly acknowledge the individual. But he's very grounded, and I think that's all credit to his parents when you consider how much success, and we all know success being a lousy teacher, making people think they can't fail, it can affect some people. Some people become quite distant, quite arrogant, quite aloof when the success is there, because they don't know that at the end of that success journey is what would be considered a normal life, where the moment you step off the Premiership football field, or the moment you no longer play at Wimbledon, or the moment you're no longer a Grand Prix driver, you'll still be acknowledged for what you've achieved. But the minute the current driver walks past, the fans are going to levitate towards there, because we're all about the latest and greatest. That's what has driven mankind or humankind forward. Technology is something we strive for, and the very best is about the here and now. It's not about the past.
I remember, David, we touched on Eddie Jordan. I spent a couple of hours in his company a few years back, and it always amazed me. I asked the question. It's almost a question that gets asked too many times. So I perhaps wasn't doing my job properly on this occasion. But I said, Eddie, you've worked with some of the very best. Who is the very best? And it surprised me, his answer. He didn't miss a beat with this answer. And it surprised me because it's a man that he didn't actually work with. He said Lewis Hamilton. So Lewis Hamilton, for him, the greatest driver that he has seen. It leads me on nicely to, first and foremost, your own opinion on that subject, David. But secondly, it kind of maybe leads into a Michael Schumacher anecdote. It's a personal question. Everyone's got a story about Michael, but when you think of the great Michael Schumacher, David, and your interactions with him, is there a story that comes to mind that you can perhaps share with us?
Yeah, well, look, Michael, it's something that I've shared. Actually, Robert touched on 98 Spa, where there was that start line or exit of La Source big crash that I caused, and then the coming together with Michael later in the Grand Prix. And when we were in the aftermath of that the following week, we're in Bernie Ecclestone's motorhome in Monza, and we're trying to just agree to apportion blame, because the test following Spa, there'd been a lot of negativity in the media. There'd been people turn up in Monza and put banners over the grandstand saying "Killer Coulthard." There was all sorts of really strong negativity about what had happened, because there was a belief that somehow I'd done that deliberately to benefit Mika, which is just, it's crazy to imagine that I had that much talent. I would be able to judge how to, let somebody crash into the back of me. But anyway, during that meeting with Michael, I was like, I'm prepared to accept my proportion of the blame. On hindsight, wasn't maybe the best thing to slow down on the racing line when there's a chance you could see me. But I, quite frankly, was scared to go off the racing line. It was torrential rain. I was having a horrible race. I was being lapped and I was in survival mode. So, apologies that I don't have Senna-esque or Schumacher-esque talent in the rain that I can just park the car somewhere. As Robert knows, you're driving scared in the rain if you're going slowly on a straight because of aquaplaning, because you don't know if someone's coming quickly and they'll run into the back of you. Senna did it in Adelaide, I think, to either a Japanese driver or Martin Brundle it would have been late 80s, early 90s. So there's been examples of cars running into the back of other cars in the rain because you can't see. So anyway, long story short, Michael wouldn't accept any blame whatsoever. And I was completely confused. And I said, well, look, when you're at home, you must be wrong sometime. And he was like, not that I remember. He just had absolute belief. He had absolute belief in everything he did. And if that's what it took to be a champion, then there you go. That's what it takes. But I would not actually want to live in a world where I'm never wrong. It's not that I'm looking to be wrong, but being wrong is part of, being a pinball of life and learning where the boundaries are and moving forward. So I have full respect for Michael, of course, but yeah, that was one story that will forever stay with me, that he was never ever wrong, even when he's at home.
Yeah, I mean, but you see very races like this with Max. Max it finds it difficult to for Barcelona. Wasn't his greatest performance this year, we should say, and
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we'll see in Abu Dhabi. All roads lead to Abu Dhabi if it's most valuable points for his 5th title or not. But it's hard for him to accept that and then to move on. I think he finally did say something, but that's the difference between a killer, a winner, a champion, and a fantastic Grand Prix driver, obviously. But well, do you see something similar with the current McLaren drivers? Do you see something where you say, okay, if they have to win it, they have the fastest car this year by far. I mean, they're already Constructors champion. Does one of these young guys have it already in them to be world champion, do you believe?
Well, one of them, I believe, will be the champion, even though it's theoretically possible that Max can come back and win it in Abu Dhabi. It would be an unbelievable sort of Brad Pitt Hollywood movie if it happens. If anyone can make it happen, Max is that person. But I think, as we saw in Mexico, there's still an underlying performance advantage in certain circumstances with the McLaren. I think that neither Lando or Oscar have shown that kind of Schumacher, Senna, Verstappen-esque, let's say, killer instinct. But that's not at all that they don't have what's necessary to win Grand Prix and to win championships. Clearly, they've shown that. So I would say that Lewis has got, he's the outrider of those greats. Your Senna, Verstappen, Schumacher. You've got Lewis, who's actually had a very uncontroversial career, very clean in many ways. They had the contact with Max at Silverstone in 2021, which was probably him saying, look, enough's enough. I'm not lifting, which obviously led to a very big accident for Max. Other than that, I don't really remember Lewis being involved in much controversial incident. So why do I mention that? I mention it because you don't necessarily have to have a little bit of, Senna, Schumacher, Max controversy to win championships. It was looking very much that it was advantage Oscar for the majority of the season. It looked like he'd discovered how to qualify the car in comparison to last year, and it looked like he just had the upper hand on Lando, excuse me. But then the last few races since Baku, Oscar's just not seemed to be able to put his best foot forward. And Lando's looked incredibly self-centered and relaxed and calm, and he's now leading the championship. So listen, I don't know who's going to win. Both of them have shown that they've got the talent to win multiple Grand Prix and to dominate parts of the season. It's going to be so interesting to see if Oscar can come out of this this difficult period. If he does, then I think we'll all go, okay, it just was a curious period. If he doesn't, then it's going to be Lando's championship.
Do you subscribe to the view, David, that McLaren are favouring Lando? We talked about it a lot on this podcast. The optics certainly would suggest that way. You think of Monza, the pit stop. You think of the papaya rules in Singapore. You've been over this road before yourself, of course. Do you lean into that narrative at all?
I think they're both given an equal opportunity in machinery and all of that side of things. So as a race driver, what's the first thing that you want? You want equal opportunity. You want equal number one status to then go out and deliver. I think there's probably a subconscious bias. It's very difficult for anyone not to subconsciously be slightly more drawn to one or the other individual, either based on knowledge and experience, and Lando's been there for longer. So, he's coming up to, in Vegas, he'll have done 150 Grand Prix for McLaren. And I'm very aware of that because I did 150 Grand Prix for McLaren. So from Vegas on, he'll be the most experienced McLaren driver. And, Oscar's, in his second season with the team. So how the real question is there anything that management can do to offset that? And it's very, very difficult because all you can do is give equal opportunity. And I think that in their desire to manage and to do things the right way, life is imperfect. And in the spotlight of Formula One, even if you've got best intentions and you try your best to do things as fairly as possible, you're going to get it wrong occasionally. And to deny that you got it wrong is to deny the realities of life. Nobody's perfect and no manager can get it right all the time. And the difficulty in trying to, one race hold station, the next race do this, it never really over the course of a season can be balanced out properly. And psychologically, the mind controls the body, not the other way around. Formula One is about your decision making. It's not about who's the strongest, who can run 100 meters the fastest. It's the mind controlling everything else. So it's very difficult, isn't it, to know the power of how people's minds are affected by what they see and what they sense. And it's a really, really complex subject of which you cannot criticize McLaren's approach in trying to do things fairly, let's say, but then you can criticize it because how do you make it fair over the entirety of a season? So therein lies the problem. It's completely, on one hand, you justify.
Yeah, you can't prepare anything. Like in last weekend in Mexico, I think a lot of British journalists and German, anybody asked Max before the race, do you already prepare yourself going into turn one? What are you gonna do? And he said, yeah, I can look over the videos, I can look back, I can think about it, but I only think about it then and there because it's a split-second decision.
Yeah.
So you can prepare everything, like McLaren looked like they want to do it to keep it fair. But then again, a split-second decision was like, okay, give the position back in Monza. Yeah, he did it, Oscar. He didn't sound like he was enthusiastic about it. Do you think our good friend Mark was excited about that, or yeah? How do you cope with that? You're managing your star driver. He's leading the World Championship, and he has to give away 3 points because of a slower pit stop of your teammate. I mean, if Christian Horner would have asked me in our days back driving together, of course I would have given you the position back, David.
Well, I had that even at Red Bull in China. They asked me to move over for Mark because I'd done an earlier stop. He came out behind me on fresher tyres, and I was running 7th because the points only went to 6 in those times behind Kovalainen, and they were on the radio saying, "Let Mark go." And I was like, "No, I'm having a go at a point. I've got Kovalainen in front of me," and they were on the radio for a couple of laps. Anyway, long story short, I didn't. I overtook Kovalainen and finished 6th. Mark didn't and finished in 8th. And afterwards, there was a big discussion about, and I remember Christian telling me that I have to be a team player. And I got very angry at that because I was a team player. I understood what being a team player. I'd lived through being a team player at Williams when I moved over for Damon, at McLaren when I moved over for Mika. everything I was doing at Red Bull at the time was about the team. It was about growing the team. But getting a point is about racing.
Yep.
And I believed I could get a point. And I wasn't going to move over and give up the chance to do that just because, it happened to be Mark, Mark's a buddy. But I'm racing, and I've validated my belief by not taking that instruction. So, of course, the team will see it one way, the manager will see it one way, the driver will see it the same way as the manager. This is the magical thing about sport. There's always someone that's happy and someone that's pissed off, because you can never be happy when you're not getting everything going your direction. So that's why I say McLaren, they're trying their very best with best intention, with best integrity to do the right thing for the team. But you can just never get it right in its fullness of the season for the two drivers. And therefore, it's almost better that you don't try and you just say, you both got the same chance, you both got the same car, and let's just see what happens. Because whenever you start to try and manipulate, it's going to end up with one of them being pissed off. And it's a great reminder that no matter how long a driver is with a team, the moment that team's not performing, that driver will want to go somewhere else. Lewis is an example of that. Whoever would have imagined at least
in coffee at Ferrari or something, just trying to get the gossip going. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want that.
But, Robert and I spoke about this, DC, and this is just human nature in a lot of ways. Obviously, you've had something similar. You were battling Mika back in 2001. Paranoia, how much does that come into play? We were talking about the fact that if you read what Oscar's been saying, his rhetoric in recent weeks, it's been hinting that something is perhaps going on out with his control. How much does paranoia, how much does human emotion get in the way of perhaps changing your view as we head into this crucial last 4 races of the season?
Yeah, we're humans, and we're affected by our feelings and our emotions. And I think that Andrea Stella and Zach are businesslike and professional enough to be able to look both Oscar and Lando in the eye and have both of the drivers believe that everything is absolutely fair and in terms of the machinery and the opportunity. So I trust in that. I've got no doubt in that. But it's fine and well resetting at this point with a few races to go, but it doesn't undo the other things. Where I get quite vocal in my commentary is when an engineer is telling the driver to move over. I just don't like that. I think the engineer has to be 100%
one team
for his driver, to the point where he'll never tell his driver to do something which is detrimental to the driver's result. I think that should be the team principal or another designated senior person in the team that delivers that bad news. I think the bond of trust between a race engineer and a driver is, in my opinion, it has to be so deep, so strong that they're never going to leave your side.
Yeah, we had some examples there with Valtteri. It's or James. It's Valtteri. So it's difficult if the senior manager comes in. Then okay, I have to give in. I cannot unplug the radio anymore. I have to do this probably. But yeah, let's hope for the remaining 4 races and also the sprint races that it's all in and let the best man driver win.
And on that point then, DC, from what you said a few moments back, you still feel that it will be a McLaren. We don't know yet whether Lando or Oscar, but you're still backing a McLaren to ultimately be drivers' world champion.
Yeah, just looking at the season as a whole, there hasn't been, okay, there was that period from Zandvoort where Max was predominantly in front of McLaren, but I think Mexico was kind of a reset again, and therefore it just feels, I don't have a crystal ball, but it just feels that McLaren will average out the last few races to finish more often than not in front of the Red Bull. I could be wrong, of course, but it just feels like that. It just feels that McLaren have been the car of the season. But we've seen in previous championships, I think it was Jenson Button in the Brawn, he won up until mid-season, then never won again, but he'd done enough, obviously, with the double diffuser to win a championship. So I don't know. That's why I'm going to be there. I'm going to be.
Yeah, soon you're going to be there, part of the show. And you've been fortunate enough to still drive all eras of Formula One cars, the V12. Have you ever driven a V12? Actually,
My very first Formula One car was the Honda McLaren V12 with a manual shift.
Lucky you. So that's V10, obviously, a lovely sound. V8, V6. And I remember you telling me that you tried the V6 recently on a demo day was it Imola? Would you mind sharing this with my Scottish teammate, that you had a chance to drive a current Formula One car together with Max Verstappen? How did that went?
Yeah, actually, it was at Silverstone when I did the Imola run. That was the V8 where we both jumped in the same car, and Max absolutely reminded me why I don't race anything anymore. But driving the all dominant car, the V6 turbo from a couple of seasons ago. Yeah, the big high performing cars, a lot bigger than the cars that we raced. They have let's say a more sophisticated ride because they're all designed to exploit the aerodynamic performance at high speed. So there's certain compromises they have to make in lower speed. That said, they are a very stiff platform to be able to carry that amount of downforce. But just the general operation of the car is very sophisticated. But irrespective, the best drivers are still the best drivers. So whether it was a V8, a V12, a V10, or the current hybrids, where you get a lot of acceleration early because of the electrical energy filling in that early gap, the best guys always exploit the performance.
Yeah, to be honest with us here, this is a question to the pair of you. With the way Formula One has gone, Liberty Media coming in, the Drive to Survive Netflix series, it seems to me the sport has never been in a healthier place. I mean, my mum, for goodness sake, 77 years of age, she does not miss a race now. She absolutely adores it. You know, again,
It's because of the Scottish commentary.
You see, that's exactly it. And when I look back on it as a young boy, the halcyon days were when you boys were racing. Your Michael Schumachers, DCs, Mika Häkkinens, Kimi Raikkonens, etc. Be honest with us now, for our viewers and our listeners. Would you love to be a Formula One driver today, or did you love having your time when it was? I'll put that question to you first.
Well, I'd love to be a Formula One driver in any era. I think it doesn't really matter which cars. It is. It depends then on the situation there and then. But I would love to try the technology to experience that again today. So maybe I should call our friends at Red Bull and ask for a show run somewhere, just to know what's going on with this battery. You can definitely in this lobby is very well now, and all of my dealers say for the Lamborghini and all these cars that are working with these batteries. You power that it takes away a little bit of that pure racing where fuel runs through your veins, but you have to come with it. Formula One, as you say, is doing very well. It attracts new car manufacturers with Audi and Cadillac. So yeah, thinking about next year's cars, would you want to drive one of those, David, with a 5 or a 50% battery and a 50% combustion engine?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy with the era that I raced. I think it was came out of tragedy of 90s, losing a couple of drivers right through the development of the technologies we had at that time, qualifying engines. It was I think a very exciting era for Formula One. Modern Formula One is off the scale in terms of its popularity, therefore the amount of money that's involved, and even, let's say, the driver who's very short period of time at the back of the grid becomes a very well-known individual, where sometimes in my era there was drivers that came in, did a couple of races and left, and you never even really recognized they were there, despite all of the blood, sweat and tears that they had put into getting there, because you were so busy and self-centered in your own career. So I think that the sport is celebrated more, the drivers are celebrated more, the engineers, the team principals, all are seen as players in the movie. Whether they should all have a speaking part in the movie or not is open to opinion, because some of them are not quite so as engaging as others. But yeah, it's just it's another era of the sport where I think you just need to look at the wives and girlfriends. They've got gazillions of followers off the back of being the wife or girlfriend, which is great for everybody involved if that's your motivation. But the bottom line for me is always that Formula One is the fastest cars and drivers of that period. I'm not going to say the best, because I'm sure there's drivers that have never made it to Formula One that could have been incredible. But life isn't fair, and Formula One's a reflection of that. So as long as Formula One is the fastest form of closed circuit racing, it will retain its popularity. If the new technology starts to see it lose a little bit of that gladiatorial spirit, then I think the sport would need to react, because nobody wants to see a dumbed down version of the very best. They want to see the very best.
You remember the shot Lewis Hamilton, I think it's Abu Dhabi, that Fernando Alonso did a demo run in his Renault of 2005 with the V10 engine, of 2004, I think it was. And just the eyes popped up of Lewis, hearing that sound again, you know, that's what you miss. You know, you have to get on with the rules and regulations as they are. But yes, I agree. Formula One has to be careful that it doesn't go too far with all the, that it's hard to explain how it works. That's what you get maybe next year, you know, to recharge the batteries. And
Because I've referenced this on the podcast, David. I remember you gave an article. Still remember it. It was a thoroughly great article on the BBC in which you were reminiscing. And again, we always like to compare eras. But you were talking about the time when you stepped out of a Formula One car, you felt it physically, mentally. Yeah. It was a hardship. You'd earned your glass of bubbly on a Sunday night after racing in F1. And you were making the point that you see a lot of drivers now, and again, it's just the modern world, but that it sponsors events on a Saturday night late into the night. That just would never have happened in your era, right?
well, there was no social media back then, so we might have been there, but there's no proof, right? There's no evidence.
That's the difference.
And it might not have been a sponsor event either.
Yeah, look, I one thing is absolutely clear. You know, I've just been in Monaco now for almost 10 days, which is fantastic. I've traveled so much that I'm normally not here that consistent. And I was in bed last night before 9. Every night I can be in bed early. I love it. And when I was racing, I wanted to be back in my room latest 9 o'clock. I didn't like, and I wouldn't go as part of my contract to dinners and events the evening before a Grand Prix. I was there to drive a Grand Prix. I was not there. I'd go to, of course I would do the work, but I could be more effective being at a cocktail at 7 to 8 o'clock, going around the entire room, than sitting down at a dinner beside, you know, a table of 8 in a room full of 60 people and just talking to 8 people. And anyway, I'm not employed to be a dinner host. I'm employed to be a Grand Prix driver. So I was very clear on my limitations. And I wasn't going out to dinners in the cities I was staying in. I very often had room service, because I wanted the peace. I wanted the focus. I wanted the time in bed. Whether I was sleeping or not was down to, you know, whether I had company. But the point being, I wanted to be at my space away from all the distractions.
Yeah, when I went with everyone F1, I had to go out with my sponsors. You know, they expected me to entertain them throughout the weekend, which was sometimes back in the Minardi days. I mean, it's still, you try to focus on your job, but it was being last or one before last because the car was dead last anyhow. But still, you try to live as an athlete and do the maximum. And I see it more and more that the drivers are really focused throughout the weekend. And on Sunday night, you can do what you want, of course.
Yeah, of course.
You can relax.
Can I ask, and I'm conscious of time, David, don't want to take up too much more of your time, but your man I know you know well, Robert does too, Christian Horner. It's so much buzz. I genuinely mean this, I don't recall a time where there's been as much buzz about a team principal as there is with Christian Horner. Every week, seemingly, there's another story. What are you hearing? Is he going to be back in F1 next year? And if you were a betting man, which I know you're not, David, but if you were, where would you see Christian Horner popping up next?
Great questions, of which I don't really have a great answer. I'm very mind my own business kind of guy. You know, I'm the guy that waits until Christmas Day to open presents. I'm not peeping the night before. You know, Christian is a friend. I've known him since karting. I wouldn't ask him in the same way that when I'm with Corinna Schumacher, I don't ask how Michael is. You know, there's certain boundaries that when somebody has something they want to tell me, they'll tell me. I'm not going to go asking the obvious thing. You know, it's a bit like I saw Mark Webber the other night. I didn't talk about the previous Grand Prix with Oscar and all the rest of it, because I'm sure he's analysed it, and I'm sure a lot of people have asked him. I was like, how are you, buddy? Are you going cycling? Are we going to go on a motorbike trip? I'm connecting with him as a friend rather than that. So having said that, I personally think that Christian is a driven individual who feels that he'll have more to play in Formula One. So I wouldn't be surprised if he turns up either as a team owner or equity somewhere within a team that's already, an existing team, or I believe there's a 12-team slot. I don't know how realistic that is, because it's not something that comes across my desk very often, to look at the structure of setting up a 12-team. But yeah, short answer is I expect to see Christian back in Formula One at some point in the future.
Yeah, definitely. That's the structure. People forget, we all talk about the drivers that achieve their dream to become a Formula One driver, but it's also a dream to become a Formula One team boss, and he's been one of the most successful team bosses in the history of the sport. So I don't think he will just go back to 1 horsepower. I saw him riding his horse back home. I think he's happy to come back to the big league again soon.
The other kind of question that we get a lot on this podcast, and obviously, again, we're looking into a crystal ball that doesn't really exist as to how the cars are going to be in 2026. But the figure of Lewis Hamilton looms still large on Formula One. He's a 7-time world champion, for goodness sake, David. But, where is he at in his career? We've been bemoaning the fact the negativity that comes out of Lewis right now is, as a Lewis fan myself, it annoys me slightly. It frustrates me. He's a bit down on himself a bit too much. Ultimately, do you feel, has he got another world championship in him? Does Lewis still have a final chapter that puts a exclamation mark against that career?
I think that anyone who would suggest that a multiple world champion like Lewis doesn't have it in him would be it'd be a high risk opinion. Ferrari might come up with the best car next year, and then what Lewis has to do then is beat Charles. So the question is, can he beat Charles across the season? If you believe he can, then he's got another world championship in him.
Have you ever had a dream to drive for Ferrari? Did they ever approach you in your career?
I met with Jean Todd. I met with Jean in Paris at his apartment and spoke about joining for 96, 97. But the contract that was offered was basically to say, if Michael's running third and you're second, you move over and things like that.
The Michael contract.
Yeah, Michael wouldn't have probably been behind me, but the point being, I just couldn't sign a contract that committed me to that. So I went to McLaren and stayed there 9 years, did my best, and the history books have got cemented the results that I was able to achieve. But I never had that sort of dream of driving Ferrari any more than I've ever owned a Ferrari road car. I recognize how brilliant the team is and how strong the brand is, but somehow I always felt good with British teams. I understand the core of a British team and the work ethic and everything there. I think it would be easier for a Central European driver or let's say an international driver to drive for Ferrari.
Success was also at Ferrari when it was almost a British team. In the days that Schumacher was winning, there were a lot of British engineers and team members, and who knows, next year.
I'll make this my last one to you today. It's a bit of a cheeky one, this. Getting into the fact there's so much mystery surrounding what the cars are going to be in 2026. So I'm kind of asking you to pull a nail out of the hay bale, as we would do in Scotland. You'll remember that.
I need the subtitles now. I need subtitles.
I want to ask this. If you could pick a team for next year, Adrian Newey in it, Aston Martin, we're expecting Ferrari to be better. Let's see what Red Bull produced. Do McLaren continue on this road? What does Total Wolf have in store for us in Mercedes? Which team do you pick? Who do you saddle up with, Robert?
Well, to look at 2014, when the last big engine regulation change was there with the hybrid engines, it was quite obvious that Mercedes had a huge advantage over everybody else. So I really don't hope that it will become an engine championship, because then might as well Audi has the fastest engine, and it doesn't even matter what your chassis is like. So, but if you look at the statistics, then I would have to bet on a car manufacturer that knows what it is like to build engines. And then I mean, Red Bull Powertrains and Ford might be a very challenging combination for them to be up there. So I still would bet on Mercedes delivering 5 engines to customer teams and the factory teams, that they will have the strongest engine, and therefore at the beginning of the year have the strongest results.
Right, Robert Doornbos is a Mercedes driver. Are you his teammate, David, or are you coming up against him? Who are you picking?
Yeah, look, I think what Robert said makes complete sense in terms of I think the power unit will be a
Again,
big...
one more time, so we have it on tape. Can you say it
Yeah,
again?
absolutely. I think that the power unit is going to be a huge factor next year. How you deploy, how you regenerate, that is going to be the dominant factor. So if I imagine all the engines are the same, okay, so let's put that to one side, then whenever you have major regulation change, that's been a pretty good hunting ground for someone like Adrian Newey. So I'm going to go left field and say Aston are going to be the team that are the most improved next year.
Yeah.
I love that. I love it, DC. Right, Robert, I'm going to give you the floor. Last question to DC, making a good one.
When are we going to go back into a Formula 1 car together? Just you and me, shoot out.
Hey, buddy, I'd rather go on a night out with you than drive Grand Prix car. I'll see you in Dubai before Abu Dhabi.
Definitely. I'll meet you here in Dubai. Great. Thanks for your time, mate.
Top stuff, DC. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us on the Pit Talk podcast, powered by Ethara. Top stuff.